There's no doubt that auction clearance rates are down, and that's been all over the news. In fact, we've had some pretty abysmal clearance rates recently, under 50% nationally, Sydney down as low as 47%, just over 50% in Melbourne, the bigger auction states. So things are definitely quiet. We want to look at what those weaker clearance rates, fewer properties going to auction, sellers starting to steer away from auctions means for us as investors, both as potential buyers and if you're actually looking to sell.
In the bigger states, Melbourne and Sydney particularly, we find auctions are the go-to method for sale. Are auctions the universal answer for a quick and certain sale?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, we've certainly seen auctions work well in the states and in the cities when they've had hotter markets. And even in some of the smaller centres like Adelaide in recent times, you've actually seen more use of auctions because the market's been running hot and vendors have been able to get a good result from that. But there are some pros and cons in any market conditions for auctions. An auction gives you an unconditional sale if it works. Settlement terms are usually known right up front. The deposit's known, everything's known.
From the perspective of auctions, it really works really well for sellers. Why? They get to determine the terms. And in a hot market, so there's a certain dependency there, in a hot market, they can dictate very clearly the outcome that they're after, and people have to comply. But again, is it certain? Is there a certainty in an auction? And the answer is no. No, there isn't.
Yeah, I think auctions will work best when you've got very positive sentiment, where you've got scarcity in the local market and a lot of buyers. So there's competition between buyers. There's the FOMO, the fear of missing out. So if you're a seller, an auction's going to work better for you in those kinds of circumstances. You've got to recognize that an auction is all about playing on the emotions of the people that are there. To some degree, the sellers as well as the buyers, but certainly the buyers. So you have buyers, they can see each other, they can see other people are competing for the same property. That engages that fear of missing out. And people will often then, because of that fear of missing out, they will pay more, they'll stretch themselves more, they'll convince themselves they can go just another $1,000, just another $10,000. Because if they don't, they'll miss out. And then they're back to having to go through the whole process again. So in that kind of environment, from the seller's perspective, an auction can work very well. But that's not necessarily the kind of environment we're seeing around a lot of the country right now, is it?
No, we're not. There is not a lot of widely accepted public confidence right now. There is a widely accepted public uncertainty right now, meaning there is a lot passed in.
But that's where auctions are actually a really useful litmus test of the sentiment that's in the market. You can get a good sense of what to expect from buyer behavior, what to then potentially expect from seller behavior as well by watching what is happening with auctions in a given area. So regardless of the macro view, if you're looking in a suburb and you can see that the auction clearance rate is low, that gives you an immediate read on how confident sellers and buyers may be in that area or not, particularly if it's an area that typically uses auctions, although not every area does. Certain areas are predisposed to using auctions. They're more typical. Other areas, they're quite unusual. And even around the bigger auction centres like Sydney and Melbourne, we can have pockets where auctions just aren't the done thing normally. And if you try to do an auction in the area, everybody comes along, they're very curious, but they stand there with their hands in their pockets because they don't know what to do because they're not used to it. But that said, that auction clearance rate does give you a great little sense test as to how the market's feeling right now.
A neutral market is around about 60% clearance. We are well below that right now in the 40s. If you look at the individual states, the numbers vary. So you need to look at what's normal in those particular states to then use that as a measure about what the broader sentiment in those major cities are, and particularly in your suburb environment, you might find a normal clearance rate of 20% because auctions are not that well utilised in that particular market. Under those circumstances, anything above 20% is a high demand environment. Well, you go, hang on a minute. The point is you understand what's happening in your suburb, and then you can make a judgment call as to the level of sentiment about clearance and burn or desire for people to want to buy.
You can choose to sell a property at auction or a private sale. An auction will work best in a stronger demand environment and where it's more widely accepted as the norm, a common way to sell. It won't work so well if that's not the case. Either people just aren't used to using auctions, or the buoyancy, the strong demand just isn't there so much. And that's where people will tend to revert to more of a private sale or a private treaty approach, where it's just listed for sale, maybe with or without a price, and the buyer is then engaging with the real estate agent or the vendor to negotiate.
Auctions can exist even in those environments, because if you've got enough people looking for your individual property, you can actually get competition between 3 or 4 buyers. And then you've got what we call the Dutch auction, the private auction in the background that can occur as the real estate agent calls 3 or 4 people and hits one against the other with promises of FOMO, pay more or FOMO, which is what you want in any market, whether it be a hot market or a cold one. So you do your property well enough, you get enough interest. If you tailor your property to the target market sufficiently, you may in fact get that demand irrespective of the nature of the broader environment.
You can manufacture an auction style environment without actually going to auction by taking that exact approach. And that could be great for the vendor if you're not in that environment. And so we're seeing that auctions are a weaker approach in many areas right now. They're not achieving success. We might have a situation where a property was listed for sale, it was going to auction, and the auction is cancelled and it suddenly becomes private sale. Or it might have been that it was listed for sale, went to auction, got passed, and now it's private sale. That tells you a lot, doesn't it, about what's going on in the vendor's mind around their journey to try and sell this property. They have a need to sell, which is why the property's on the market in the first place. But they might have had certain expectations going into the campaign that are now starting to change. And so aspects like pre-auction discussions become really important to us as buyers. Our ability to go and negotiate prior to auction. If something passes in, our ability to then negotiate post-auction comes to the fore. And if we see that it went to auction, got passed in, failed, and now is listed for private sale, then that opens up a whole different approach to our negotiation compared to what we might have had in the week or two leading into the auction. So it's really critical for us as investors, and a real insight for us as investors, to watch that process for a given property that we might be interested in a suburb. And the information that we can glean from that about the seller's psychology, where they're at in their journey, can be very, very valuable, I think, for negotiation.
What we're finding, though, is that we're not actually seeing as many auctions. There are sellers who are just simply not going down that path. Where there is a plan for one, if it fails, does that mean, oh, bargain, it's cancelled? Is it a bargain? Like anything that's a failed auction, does that automatically mean bargain? The answer is no. No, that doesn't necessarily mean bargain. Don't just go, oh, excellent opportunity, let's run in blind.
Auction bad does not equal instant
Bargain good.
Property best deal in the world. It comes back to, I think, some of the fundamentals around negotiation. Understand the vendor's need. But if you do have that scenario where reality has collided with expectations for a vendor, and you do see this, and we are seeing this in the market at the moment, where, I thought I was going to get this thing sold in 30, 60 days from now in my auction campaign, or even in my private treaty campaign, and it's now just sitting there. Nobody showed at the auction, nobody bid at the auction, it got passed in, or I'm just not getting the inquiries that I might have been anticipating. That does a couple of things in my mind. One is it starts to give the agent, the vendor's agent, ammunition to condition the vendor's expectations, and they'll often be doing that. No disrespect to agents, but agents only get paid when they make a sale. And there's a big difference between making a sale at all versus making a sale at a particular price point in terms of your ability to get paid. So the agent inevitably has a conflict of interest in that. In order to get money through the door, in order to get bread on the table, they need the sale. Does it have to be at the vendor's original expected price? No, it doesn't. In order for them to get a commission, they could come down 10, 20% off that, and at least they still get paid something. Versus, might get a few hundred, a few $1,000s more one way or another. So there is that pressure that starts to come on, I think, in that scenario where the agent can start to use the fact that we're not getting the inquiries, or nobody showed at the auction, or it got passed in at the auction. You can see the market's telling you what's the market telling you? You've got to drop your price. We've just got to be real about the market, and they start to condition the vendor down.
From a buyer's perspective, though, Simon, if we are out there looking to buy, are we in an abundance of opportunity market right now?
Vendors may become more motivated, more flexible on price and terms. And so that allows us to set up a couple of things, I think, as a buyer. One is when you're looking at a campaign, if it was a campaign that was going to auction, or the auction is scheduled for, say, 4, 6, 8 weeks from now, you have a greater opportunity to start engaging with the agent early in that process and see if you can negotiate a deal prior to auction on the basis that you are going to be able to offer the vendor more certainty of a sale. So if they're feeling nervous because of what they're hearing in the market, because of the latest stats around auction clearance rates and so forth, they're feeling nervous about going to auction, they're not getting the level of inquiry, you show up and you can offer them the certainty of a sale, albeit on your terms and at a price that works for you. That has a lot more weight and a lot more value in these sort of market conditions. And that may be a key way to get a great deal. So you don't even have to wait for the auction. And I wouldn't be. I'd be getting in there, having the conversations with the agent today about an auction that's, a few weeks away, and saying, look, are they interested in selling prior? If they are, I could make it easy for you, blah, 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 give you the certainty, but it has to be this price and on these terms. If it proceeds to the auction and passes in, then any auction contract with all of its standard terms and conditions, I think from a buyer's perspective, you just go, right, that's off the table. Again, I'm just going to negotiate on the price and terms that I want. You've then got that additional conditioning effect of a failed auction, which is devastating for a vendor. Having been on both sides of this equation over time, Brendan, I know what it feels like when you go to sell an auction and it passes in. It's like, what the heck just happened? And you have all this doubt. That is the psychology that a vendor will be in immediately post-auction. So there's a window there to go in and say, look, obviously it didn't sell at auction. I wasn't prepared to buy it at auction, but here is what I am prepared to do, and see if you can come to some agreement on price and terms that works for you and does get you the right numbers in the deal.
Of course, there's timing associated with that. On the premise that the auction fails, you still got 3 days of unconditional.
And you can make that point to the agent, is to say, oh, I'm not prepared to buy it under auction conditions. I understand you might be persisting with that, but that's not what I'm prepared to do. Here is my offer. If you're prepared to, with the vendor, just waive away the auction contract, and we'll create our own conditional contract.
If a vendor chooses not to use auction at all as a sales mechanism, you can still go in this environment, particularly where it's feeling the pain. You can go in, I'm going to provide you certainty. So it goes back to the conversation of buying on price and terms, not just buying on price. You can get a good price because terms suit the vendor. If this vendor wants certainty, then you can drop the price to whatever suits you so that the terms work for the vendor. Oh, I don't have to worry anymore. I've been wearing this thing for ages. This is starting to wear me down. Christmas is coming. I don't want to hang on to it after Christmas. The staging's costing me money. The holding costs are costing me money. Everything's just bleeding me dry. I want it to end. And if you offer an end date, that can be a real solution, and they may sacrifice money now in order to have that certainty.
What if I am the seller? Do auctions still have a place in my sales strategy in the current environment, or when might they have a place in that strategy? A lot of agents will push auctions as a selling mechanism, and there can be a couple of reasons for that. They might have a good reason for that, or it might be because that actually helps with self-promotion of the agency. And we've certainly seen that, especially in quieter markets, agents using auctions or driving a vendor to an auction, not because they actually believe the property will sell at the auction, but because A, it gives the agency exposure through the advertising campaign. But then when it does pass in, it gives the agent that permission to condition the vendor down and to try and achieve a sale post-auction. So they try and attract people to the auction who might have expressed an interest. Even if those people don't bid, they start chasing those people afterwards and trying to negotiate something.
That's a very conspiracy theorist approach to making a sale.
So you say that, but I've experienced that.
I'm not saying it doesn't exist.
Yeah. You do need to be mindful about, well, what is the reason to go to auction? Is there an actual good reason? Am I just going to effectively be paying for some advertising to boost the agency, or do I actually have reason to believe that an auction will be effective? So when would an auction be effective? Comes back to some of those earlier points we made, that you've got something about the property and the area that is going to create some tension, some sense of FOMO, scarcity, competition for it. So do you have a property that is inherently scarce, not weird, just scarce in the area? And is it a tightly held area where there are clearly buyers there that would be interested in your property? An auction could still make sense in that environment, in that context, and you could very well consider taking it to auction for that. I think if the agent is just unsure what your property should sell for and they're just using the auction as a mechanism to kind of test the market, you could spend a lot of time building up your hopes at the auction only to be disappointed. So I think, again, you need to be clear about why you're going to auction, and you need the agent to justify why they would want to take your property to auction versus just running some sort of private treaty campaign, in my view.
So if you are looking to sell, the encouragement would be pick the agent that's going to work for you and the property, not the agent that's going to work for themselves. Be realistic in your numbers, absolutely. If you're not realistic in your expectations in today's current market conditions relative to your suburb, your pocket, what you believe you can sell it for, if you don't do the research in advance, then you're setting yourself up for a disconnect with reality and therefore some very harsh conversations potentially between you and your real estate agent. If you are a buyer, auctions can be used as a form of leverage based on, as Simon said, the pain associated with the vendor of having failed at an auction or having a miserable rollout leading into the auction date, knowing full well that nobody's actually going to buy on the day. That gives you an opportunity as a buyer to negotiate well and hard. Negotiate on terms to give the vendor an opportunity to have certainty in their sale in this uncertain market. That might work. Are auctions dead? The answer is no. No, they're not dead. There is a place for them. My suggestion would be the place must be a really hot market where it's publicly acknowledged that they're in demand. Under those circumstances, you get the most intense form of competition and the highest levels of FOMO. Under those circumstances, price will be driven up. In an environment where the market is flat or at worst in decline, and if that's where you're facing right now, then the encouragement would be don't go to auction because that could work against you as a seller.
When you're out there looking for opportunities, don't just look at whether something is going to auction and assume that that's therefore going to be a great negotiating opportunity. What you want to do is take it a step further and watch what happens in the campaign. How long is it before the auction? Is there an opportunity to get in there and start dealing direct with the agent to maybe buy pre-auction by offering certainty? If it goes through the auction campaign and the auction campaign fails, what is that telling you about the psychology, about the journey that the vendor is on, and therefore how you might approach the negotiations? So just don't assume that an auction equals bargain, but do look at what's happening with that campaign and use that to inform your negotiations.
If you're new to this community, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you join us. Thank you very much. Until we meet again next week, have a great week. Take care, guys.
See you Thursday.